Thank you very much, and thank you for coming to this talk. Welcome. I'm Lee Williams. That's a picture of me there. I don't know now why I put a picture of me on the first slide, because you can see what I look like. I'm standing here. But if you want to, for a comparison, that's me outside, I guess, and this is me inside. I'm a writer and designer. I've been working for quite a few years now on various games, from quite big games to much smaller indie titles. This is a selection of some of the things I've worked on. The most recent thing I did was Cryptmaster with my friend and co-developer Paul Hart. To be honest, Paul did most of the work on Cryptmaster. He did the coding, the art. I sort of floated and offering ideas, encouragement, sort of getting in the way. Before that, I did all the writing for Valheim, the story and the lore. I worked on a number of other games, Spirits of Xanadu, with another very talented developer, Alan Trivett. I've wrote a deal of interactive fiction. Ironheart was one I did for Choice of Games that I'm still rather proud of. Some of you will probably be looking at Trackmania and Fall Guys and thinking, surely there's not a lot of writing in those, and you'd be right, there's not much writing, but that doesn't stop me from putting them on the slide. It's just because they're very good games, and it was fun to work on those ones. Even more cheeky is that I've put Return of the Obra Dinn down there, because if I'm honest, I can't take any real credit for that at all. That was Lucas Pope's game entirely, but I'm listed, I think, as a language consultant. Lucas knew that I'm a huge history and language nerd, so I just sort of looked through the dialogue to give suggestions on what might be period accurate and some of the regional accents from the British sailors. So I've worked on a lot of different games. I'm also going to give you a very quick rundown of my more general career, not because I like talking about myself, although I do quite like talking about myself, but because it will be, I promise you it will be a bit relevant later on. So I began my career as far away from game dev as you can imagine, 3 decades ago now. When I left school, I was a labourer. I worked for the electricity board on mains electricity lines. I was a security guard, a custodian in a stately home, a tour guide. I took a job teaching English in China, and I ended up staying 5 years in China. Got married in China, came back, moved back to the UK. When I came back, I began teaching languages as a peripatetic language teacher in local schools, French, Spanish, and Chinese. I can't claim to be perfectly fluent in any of those, but I'm fluent enough that I can fool a room full of small children. So I did that for a while. Then I finally got a degree, remotely did a degree in English literature and fully qualified as a teacher, and I had a whole career as a teacher in special education with my particular focus on autism, and later I ran a unit for children with emotional and behavioural difficulties. They couldn't access mainstream schooling. So I did that for a number of years. On the side, through all that, I was writing bits and pieces for video games. And then I had a promotion just before the pandemic. I had a promotion at work. I was promoted to a sort of managerial role. Anyone who knows me would tell you that's a bad idea. I'm not very good at managing anything. So I didn't enjoy that role so much, and I decided to take the plunge full-time into games development, which is how I ended up here. So the talk I would like to give you today is about a discussion of words in games and games in words. I specifically don't want to talk about games writing in general, narrative and story and dialogue. I'm going to focus more today on how words and language can be used as gameplay mechanics in their own right. So I'm going to begin in a moment just by looking at how, in my opinion, language already possesses what I would call natural play mechanics. Language itself operates to a set of rules and conditions that are similar in many ways to a game. I'm not going to talk in any great depth about linguistic theory, semantics, syntax, for the dual reason that I want to keep the talk as accessible as possible, and also I wouldn't know what I was talking about, so I want to spare you that. This is going to be more from my perspective as a sort of amateur linguist and a games developer, just reflecting on the ways that those two things can go together, and hoping you get something of value from the reflection. I want to also whiz through a few thousand years of words as gameplay mechanics, the ways in which people have played with words over the years. Some practical advice, hopefully, for using word-based mechanics in games, and especially looking at some of the challenges of localization, which is obviously, if you're tying words into the actual gameplay, is a much greater challenge than it would ordinarily be. A brief post-mortem of Cryptmaster as well, that's the most recent game that I made, and that's heavily focused on it uses a lot of the mechanics we're going to be discussing today. So that's my chance to plug my own game, really, right at the end. So I hope you'll hang around for that. And then if there's time at the end, and you've all been very good and sitting nicely, my teaching career dies hard, then if you're very good, I might see if you've got any questions at the end. And just raise your hand if you want to use the toilet, one at a time, please. No, I don't want any bad behavior in the corridor. So, language, an early puzzle. I wanted to start with this because I think language itself, as I say, it has certain mechanics that you could consider to be game mechanics, and it's maybe one of the first complex puzzles we encounter in life. So that's the point of view of a baby who will later be inexplicably terrified of owls. I wanted to really just highlight what I think is, as I say, one of our first experiences of language when we're born. We develop a sense of the world, a sense of the objects around us, and the next step for most people, unless you're raised by wolves, is going to be that you will learn the words that you're going to associate with those things. You'll begin to make sense of it. You'll begin to internalize it using language. And there's still a lot of discussion about how much language is inherent in our brains, how much grammar and the rules of language we already have within us, and how much our brain's development is influenced by our learning of language. I'm not going to dive into any of that today, but it's interesting, and it's interesting to see how language does become a set of rules by which we navigate our lives. I remember why I put that there. That's a stock photo of a lady with 4 babies. I think ignore this little one on this side. He's not in the conversation. He's having a little moment to himself there. I know how that feels. I'm sure we probably all do. I should have cropped him out, really, to save his dignity. But I guess she's obviously, this is an early game that everybody plays, and I think naturally, as parents, we tend to play like that with our children when we're teaching them language. Presumably, she's got these blocks, and she's saying, what colour are they? And the baby will be saying blue, green, and she might say no, turquoise, aquamarine. So I mean, frankly, it's not a very fun game. It's a dumb game. As a games designer, I don't rate that as a game. My son used to get me to play that over and over and over, hundreds of times. But it's an early game that we might play with language. And a lot of how we learn language, I think, is through play. That was my favourite book when I was a boy, a collection of nursery rhymes. And the sort of ways in which we'll learn language, we'll use things like rhymes. I don't remember much about my very early steps in learning language, but I do remember very well the excitement of learning that you could rhyme words together, mat, cat, bat. Just that pleasure in hearing the same sounds rhyme and visually seeing it as well. That's something which, some of the first ways we'll teach language to children are often through rhymes, through nursery rhymes. Alliteration, the repeating the same sound, usually a consonant at the start of words. The bendy boy belligerently. I should have prepared something. That's that kind of thing. The sly snake slithered stealthily through the sand. That's sibilance, which is a form of alliteration. So all of these very playful ways of establishing words. Tongue twisters. I have actually practiced one. I'm going to attempt now. Betty Botter bought some butter, but she said, this butter's bitter. If I put it in my batter, it will make the batter bitter, but a bit of better butter will make the batter better. So she bought a bit of butter better than her bitter butter, and she put it in her batter, and the batter was not bitter. So it was better Betty Botter bought a bit of better butter. So thank you. Oh, thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. I didn't practice that over and over in my room this morning, I promise you. So yeah, tongue twisters, which are always fun as well. And most languages will have versions of tongue twisters. When I was in China, I remember there was one which I can't say for you, but it uses the word shi in lots of different terms. 10 lions doing something, and it's the same word. It's just the same word over and over and over with slightly different tones, and it makes a full passage. It's fascinating. Onomatopoeia, so words that sound like the things that they signify, the things they're describing. So boom, crackle, zap. Again, I think most languages have these. I would imagine that a lot of words began in this way. You know, you ask somebody, what are the birds doing? Well, they're tweeting. You know, I think a lot of words probably do begin like that. And words themselves, more generally, even words which don't actually mimic the sound, can sometimes express something about the thing. I remember Jorge Luis Borges, the writer, saying that the English word moon was one of his favourite words because it's round and it has a weight to it. It's a perfect round word, and I always think that's very nice. Moon. It is a lovely round, weighty word, and I think a lot of words can be like that. Somebody once told me, you have to be careful with this. Somebody once told me that the sexiest word in the English language was plinth. Plinth, P-L-I-N-T-H, because of the way you say it. Plinth. Don't anybody say it now, please, because I can't be held responsible. A whole room of people saying plinth. I can say it. I'm a professional. So the sound of words sometimes can, carry something extra. I think words are wonderful artifacts in themselves. Handwriting as well. So not just the sound of words, but the visual look of words. When I used to work in special education, we would often, for children who struggled with motor skills or visual issues, we would often teach handwriting by doing it. We would have a tray of shaving foam and draw the letters really nice and big in the shaving foam and say them, and I used to enjoy that myself. There's something very pleasant about the shape of words as well as the sound of words. And even more so in a lot of languages, my wife often talks to me about the characters in Chinese languages with a pictographic basis, where there's a lot of value also in the shape of the word, the way it's written, the strokes. So all these things are early ways that we look at language. This is something else I wanted to mention. It's not a great example. It's the best one I could find online at quite short notice. This is when I used to work, again, in special education. This is made with a software called Boardmaker. And I would use this a lot. I would use this in every lesson because I had a lot of students who found it in varying degrees, found it difficult to access written text. So what you would do in Boardmaker is you have these symbols that go above the words to help convey the meaning. And the interesting thing I always thought with Boardmaker, it made me think in a slightly different way, because you don't need a symbol for every word. So here you've got sometimes, so a part of the time, I get mad, and a picture of mad. I might have put a symbol for I in there as well. It depends on the context, what you expect the children to be understanding. But it's very interesting that it makes you think about how much of language, how much of the sort of nuance of language is almost superfluous. I wouldn't say it's superfluous. It's got other purposes, but we don't need it always to carry the meaning. The actual words which carry the meaning of what we're saying are, or can be, surprisingly few. So here you want to put a symbol for sometimes, mad, someone bothers, mad. Someone does something wrong, bad, upset. Okay, upset. I, calm. So you actually, and you only really need those words to carry the bulk of the meaning in a sentence like that. And I think a lot of languages are like that. I know, when I was in China, in Chinese, you would say, for example, 我去学校, I go school. And it makes me think there are other sentences I could give you where the Chinese is a lot more complex than English, but that's one where perhaps it's simpler, and it would make me realize, well, you don't really need, why do we need to the? I don't necessarily need to the to convey the meaning of that sentence. And you don't conjugate verbs, really, in Chinese. You could just say, I go to school tomorrow, and it makes you think, well, yeah, okay, you don't really need to. If you're going to attach the word tomorrow at the end, or future at the end, or yesterday, you don't really need to. Why do you need to change the verb? I know there are in this room a number of Spanish, French, Portuguese, German speakers, and I would, in a similar vein, I would say when I was learning French and Spanish at school, why do you have gendered nouns? That's kind of, what were you thinking? Why do we need that? My son sometimes, he's learning French at the moment, and he'll say to me, Dad, why is it un stylo? Why is a pen a boy word? And I just have to be honest with him and say, look, the French don't want you to learn French. If you learn French, then they wouldn't be able to say that English people don't learn French, and that you would deprive them of a great national pleasure. So I'm joking. I love French, but So this was another something else which made me think about language in a more interesting way, and this will be relevant in a moment when we look more at games that use language. Very quickly, I thought I'd do a quick whiz through history, at some examples of wordplay. This is quite interesting. This is the oldest one I could find. This is the crocodile hymn from an Egyptian temple, and you can see it's written almost entirely using hieroglyphs, pictographs of crocodiles, some of them slightly differently. It hasn't been translated that I could find. There are lots of theories about what it means, but there's a lot of discussion and a lot of debate still about the exact meaning. But it seems very likely that the priests who put this crocodile hymn here, and there's a ram hymn next to it as well, we're having fun, essentially. We're playing with words. It's a very early example, it seems, of wordplay. They've a little bit like the Chinese passage I was saying to you, where you use the same word with different tones repeatedly. It's repeated crocodile hieroglyphs, and it obviously has a meaning, but nobody's quite sure what. Going back in history, you find the Romans used to use the Sator square, is quite famous. I don't know, I expect some of you will have seen this before. Let me think. Sator, the farmer, arepo, tenet, opera, rotas, it works his plough, I think roughly. That's probably a poor translation. But obviously the interesting thing about it is that it's the same whichever way you read it. It reads back and forth, the same. So that's a very early example of essentially a word puzzle, and it was often used as a charm. I don't know what it is about palindromes that would scare away demons, but it was often found on things where it would be used as a charm or a protection. This very grim-looking skull with the Sator square on it was used in Masonic courts in Westphalia in medieval times. So it must have been terrifying. You would already be scared enough to be dragged before this very grim court and told to swear an oath on a skull. And then this, which almost feels like magic, I guess, would just heighten that. And early Christians, I think, must have been delighted when they discovered that they could also make it into this Paternoster cross using the same letters. So there's a lot of this sort of wordplay through history. Oh, this is an interesting one. This is a Greek amulet. Can anybody tell me can anybody spot what's interesting about that? Yes. Thank you. Yes, it's a palindrome. It can be read backwards. You can see it goes both ways, and it means apparently Yahweh is the bearer of the secret name, the Lion of Ra, secure in his shrine. So again, it had a connotation of magic or a protection somehow. That there was something special about this, that it can be read exactly the same forwards and backwards. Palindromes in general, of course, are a very common sort of wordplay. These ones, this is almost certainly not said by Napoleon Bonaparte, but this is a famous one. Able was I, ere I saw Elba. I remember years ago at school, the first person who told me that one, a friend at school, told me that palindrome and told me that it was a quote from Napoleon. And I I always said, no, it can't be. It wasn't a quote by Napoleon. And it only occurred to me this morning while I was preparing this talk that what I should have said is, why was he talking in English? And it annoyed me when I thought of that. I thought all those years ago, that should have been the first thing I said to him. Oh, why was he speaking English then? But it's only now, like 30 years later, occurred to me. Madam, I'm Adam. Again, I'm very sceptical that was ever said in the Garden of Eden. But that's another famous palindrome. Riddles. So riddles are another type of wordplay. You can have riddles around individual words or around figures of speech. That's one from the Exeter Book of Riddles, a very famous Anglo-Saxon Book of Riddles. That one is still unsolved. That's why I put it up there, in case anybody fancies having a crack at that. Apparently there are lots of proposed solutions, but nobody has ever managed to agree on. Rather perversely, the Exeter Book of Riddles doesn't include the solutions to the riddles in the book. So there's still a lot of debate about many of them. Lots of them are just really crude innuendos. I think a good third of the riddles in there. This is one I like this one because it annoys people. This is one from my own game. This is one from Cryptmaster. This is based on a joke that I once heard. When someone stole all the lamps in my room, I may have looked glum and full of gloom, but how do you think I felt? Can anybody tell me the answer to that one? You will groan when I tell it to you. The answer to that is, I may have looked glum and full of gloom, but I felt delighted. I felt delighted. You see, they take it because they stole the lamps in the room. So I quite like that, and I very much like, if I watch people on streams playing Cryptmaster, I like watching them do that riddle because they want to flip the table when they discover what the answer is. They're always kind of annoyed to find out the answer. Puns, wordplay. I used to think that puns were the lowest form of humour, like way below sarcasm even. But I think since I've become a father, something just clicked in my head, and I love puns now. I can't stop making puns. That's one of my favourites, Groucho Marx. Outside of a dog, a book is man's best friend. Inside of a dog, it's too dark to read. I can't stand Russian dolls. They're so full of themselves. They are awful puns, but I think they're awful in a good way. So then in the 20th century, in the 19th and 20th centuries, more complex word puzzles came along, began to be developed. The crossword puzzle, which came along surprisingly late. Early crosswords were all symmetrical, like this one, and then I guess they realised at some point they didn't need to give themselves that extra pain of making it perfectly symmetrical. Word search, of course. Please don't do the word search now. I can see some of you are doing the word search. I can see when you're doing it. Please don't. A monogram of the alphabet. I don't know if that's true or not. I should have checked it myself really before I just threw it up on a slide. But that supposedly has got all the letters and numerals in the diagram there. Hangman. Which is fun. I used to play that a lot with my kids. And in school it was always a good one for filling time. I looked online to see if anybody knows the roots of Hangman. Nobody does. There is a theory that it was played by prisoners waiting to be executed, which I don't know. I'm sceptical of that as well, to be honest. I find that kind of unlikely. I think if I was about to be executed, the last thing I would want to do is play a game where I drew a man hanging. So these are all more modern examples of wordplay. Ciphers and codes and cryptograms as well, of course. This is a page from the Usborne Book of Spies, which I used to love when I was a boy. I would write codes on things and hide them around and hassle my younger brother to solve them, which he didn't really want to do, but this is a simple code. I've forgotten now the name of this, where you... Pigpen, thank you so much. Thank you. Yes, my mind went blank. A Pigpen cipher, yes. So you can see, and sometimes you'll have a key to it as well, so you'll put the letters in it in a different way, and then you can use the grid as symbols to make a simple code. That's another one I thought I'd show from Cryptmaster. This is another one that I like because it annoys people. We've got a code in Cryptmaster as well, so a language which is written in these symbols in code, and it's a simple one-to-one substitution from English. But there is a there is a room where there's a countess. There's a vampiric countess in Cryptmaster, and in her rooms, on one of the walls, this is written in code. I wonder if anybody wants to have a go at translating that. You'll notice the first letter of each word is the same. Again, you'll groan when you. I'll tell you. It says, this is the mildest sort of spoiler for the game. It says "live, laugh, love," and it's written on one of her walls. And again, I like that because people are just fed up when they spent ages deciphering this code and looking at finding things all over the game, and then they finally solve it, and they just go, "Oh, for sake!" So I quite enjoy watching that. It's terrible, but right. So now onto video games. So really, just about right. So this, how many people has anybody played this game? Did anybody play this game? No, right. That's interesting. This was Captain Blood, which it was released in 1988. So I would have been 13 when it launched, and it had a huge effect on me. It was a French game made by a studio based in Paris, I think. The music was Jean-Michel Jarre. It was a fantastically original game. It was huge when it released in France mostly, but in the UK also. It was just such a weird thing. It caught the attention of weird boys like me, I guess. It was fascinating to me. What it was is it had a really convoluted plot that I still can't quite remember. It's not as important, I guess. In the game you played a game developer who had become sucked into his own video game, cloned multiple times, and he was now trying to go through the universe and kill all of his clones, and he had, I think, 5 clones left to kill. It was a very, very weird, convoluted plot. But the way you did this was you would travel around this vast universe by putting in star coordinates and operating your ship, you can see here. And on each planet, then, you would fly through this sort of fractal canyon until you got to the end, and then you would encounter what I think was the game's most significant feature, which was this. You would communicate in the game with aliens. And so when you arrived at the end, you would find an alien, like this one here, and you had these pictograms, and you could go along. There's actually, I think there's about 150 of them in total. You would discover more and more of them as you went through the game. And you could talk. You could talk using them. So you could put this one, I think that's me, you see, pointing at himself. Me, love, peace. I love peace. So like, I come in peace. And then you click the lips there, and you would talk to the alien, and the alien will say something back to you in these pictograms, which are essentially they're kind of like emojis, I guess, like sort of early emojis. And it fascinated me. And you could say, I mean, as I say, I was a 13-year-old boy when the game was launched. There was one of the pictograms, I can't see it there, one of the pictograms, there was one for sex. So I would type in a lot of things, use sex, big warrior, whatever, just to see what response I could get. And the aliens would talk back to you, and often they would say, like, me like sex, lol, 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 like that, grin, 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 grin. It was really weird. They were like sort of early emojis, but you could also, when I wasn't doing those sort of schoolboy antics, you could also get surprisingly in-depth conversations out of some of these aliens. You'd ask them about other alien races. You could ask them how they felt about things. You could get from them coordinates of other places to go in the universe. So you would some of them you could befriend, and you could invite them onto your ship, and they would come and join your ship. It was a really, I won't say it was perfect. It was kind of flawed in many ways that I won't go into, but it was fascinating, and it seemed so far ahead of its time. I remember when I played Captain Blood, it just sort of blew my mind, and I wouldn't have realised it at that young age, but with hindsight, I think it sort of lit a fire in me for this kind of thing, this simulating language within games like this. It's I thoroughly recommend it, but with the proviso that it's an old game. The UI doesn't feel very intuitive nowadays. But it was doing something really fascinating that I think we still haven't some of the things it was doing we still haven't really caught up with. I can't think of many games that do this in such an immersive way, and it really did feel immersive. But I wanted to just go through some of the other games, some other modern games that use words in an interesting way, in my opinion. You might hopefully get some recommendations out of these for things to check out. So words, the games that use words, specifically words and letters as a gameplay mechanic. So games like Bananagrams, a lot of these are more tabletop games. Bananagrams, Scrabble, of course. Lock, I love, is wonderful. You can get a digital version of that now on Steam, but I've got the book version as well. That's a really, really cool little puzzle game. I love that. There are lots of these now, like Wordscapes, of course. Casual games using words are huge. Phones and devices. That's quite an obscure one, but I play that a lot with my sons at the moment. Illiterati, that's a tabletop game. Sort of difficult to describe, like a kind of takes some things from Scrabble and Bananagrams, but then puts a whole story and a whole new set of mechanics around it. It's really good. Wordle, I expect everyone's familiar with Wordle, which has been a huge hit. I think it's quite telling that was probably the most interesting picture of Wordle I could find online, because it's just so good, it's just so pure, and it works so well. The mechanic, you don't need to dress it up with anything. It's just a great game. And so, yeah, I mean, as the designer of a game in which I dressed up word mechanics with dungeon crawling and spookiness and skeletons and all sorts of things, Wordle just fills me with rage and bitterness, really, because it is just such a pure, perfect example of a really good word mechanic. Some other games, conlang games, so constructed language games. So on a slightly different angle. I don't know how many people have played some of these games here, just to a vague idea. Right, most people, that's great. So, I mean, Heaven's Vault, I fell in love with when I played that. It's a wonderful game. It tasks you with deciphering an ancient language. And so, as you discover the words, you begin to use your own sort of instinct about what they might mean, and you discover the meaning of the words. And as you get deeper and deeper into the game, it becomes, in my opinion, more and more satisfying. At a certain point, I did feel like I was delving into like a properly deciphering an ancient language, and it's got just enough structure to it that it leads you into it nicely, without hand-holding, so to speak. So you feel like you're doing it yourself. That was a wonderful game. Mist and Riven had their own language, their own constructed language within those games. I forget exactly what it was called now, but there are places online where people write things in the construct. That was quite a complex one, the language that was in Mist. Tunic, I must admit, I haven't played. It's on my list to play. Now we've finished development on our game, I've only just got time again to start being able to play a lot of games that I haven't been able to play over the last year or two. That's high on my list because I've seen some of the things that does. I think it has like a game manual. Some of you who've played Tunic will certainly know more than I do. But it has a game manual essentially with a constructed language within it that you can decipher for yourself to uncover secrets in the game. So I'm excited to play that. Chants of Sennaar was probably my favourite game, I think, of the last year or so. That's similar to Heaven's Vault. In fact, I think I've got a couple of pictures there. So in Chants of Sennaar, there are 4, maybe 5 separate languages that you can decipher within the game. And you have essentially like a dictionary that you build up of the symbols, the pictograms that go into making up these languages. And it's got these lovely illustrations that help you figure out what the word for looking is, what the word for finding is. And what you do is, as you walk through the game world, you'll see the people in the world speaking, and the speech bubbles above their heads will display the characters that they're saying, and you'll see signs above doors and that sort of thing. So you begin to decipher the language in a very natural way through usage. So it doesn't feel purely like an academic exercise. It feels more like being in a foreign country and gradually piecing together things. Oh, okay, I know what that symbol means because I saw it over there. I know that that must be a pottery because he's making pots there. And then later you see the same symbol come up. It feels really natural. It really does feel like you've just been dropped. It reminds me, say, of when I first went to China, and just the awe of being, I don't know what anything means, and then gradually you start to make sense of things, and when you see something repeated a number of times in different contexts, you begin to figure things out. So, Chance of Sonar, if you haven't played, I thoroughly recommend. Weird games. I should have changed that title. I think I put that as a provisional title and forgot to change it. These are games that I couldn't fit into any of the other two categories, but these are some games that also do some fantastically interesting things with language. Counterfeit Monkey. Has anybody played Counterfeit Monkey, I wonder? No. Counterfeit Monkey is a brilliant game by Emily Short, who anything she's done is worth checking out. For anybody who's interested in words and language, she's amazing. And Counterfeit Monkey is one of my favourite games from her. It's a text game, and it has this fascinating premise that you have a device which can remove letters from words. And when you remove a letter from a word, it actually changes the object. So, for example, an early game, you see a codex in a window. You need a code to get through a nearby door. You set the device to X. You wave it at the codex. It removes the X, and now it's a code. Now it shows you the code to get through the door. And there's a lot of very clever puzzles like that, and also just a huge amount of thought gone into establishing, what words you can make from other words. You can just do a lot of things for fun and think, oh, if I take that letter out, trying to think of an example now. Like you take a C out of a chair, and now it's a hair. I don't think that is one from the game. That's just the first thing I could think of. But there are a lot of very clever interactions like that. It's a really, really cool mechanic. Scribblenauts, I always think Scribblenauts is like the best magic system in a game. You just type words and things appear. I think it's great. That was actually, Cryptmaster turned out to be very, very different from Scribblenauts, completely different, but it was a very early inspiration for us. We started trying to make something similar. And I think that's a wonderful game again, and it just makes you reflect on words and language and how things work in the world. If you haven't played Scribblenauts, basically whatever you write, you draw, and it comes into the world, and you can add adjectives and things. So you could create a sword, but then you can make it be a sentient sword, and it will go around on its own, or you can make it be a burning sword, and it'll be covered in flames. And it's just a lovely, playful game. Glitter Grove I'm not going to talk about because I don't mind spoiling my own games, but I'm not going to spoil somebody else's game. But I just put it there because some of you might have played it, and it does one of the very cleverest things with language that I've seen in a game, so I couldn't omit it, but I'm not going to talk about it. But if you haven't played it, play it. Baba Is You is wonderful. That does such clever thing. How many people have played that? I'm assuming some people have played that. Good, yes. It just does some, again, fascinating things with words. You can physically push words around in it. So you can push Baba, instead of Baba Is You, you could push Baba away and put Flag Is You, and now you will be the flag in the game, so you'll be moving the flag around instead of Baba. You can alter the sentences to change the game world and change the properties of the game world. So you can make things solid, you can make things be able to be pushed, things like that, just by switching sentences around. And it's extremely clever. It does some very clever things with words. So then I wanted, just at the end, to give a quick post-mortem of Cryptmaster. Has anybody played Cryptmaster, incidentally? Oh, a couple of people, thank you. So this is the game that we released recently. And in Cryptmaster, really, what we did, I think, is kind of throw as many word mechanics into the game as we could. So a lot of the things we've seen previously, I won't claim that we've done any of them to perfection, but we threw the lot in there, more or less. And it was a lot of fun to make. So in Cryptmaster, the idea of the game is that you have, well, first of all, I'll tell you how we started developing Cryptmaster. I think might be a better approach. We began making something completely different. We wanted to make a game about pirates, and we had a pirate ship, and you were the captain of the ship, and you had a pistol, and you could shoot anything you wanted to interact with, you shot in the environment. That was all it was to begin with. But then we had a fun idea that you could maybe shoot words out of people's sentences, because people would come up and talk to you and they'd have a speech bubble. And we thought, oh, wouldn't it be fun if you could shoot words out of their sentence and it will change what they're saying to you. You can shoot the word not out of somebody's sentence and you flip it from a negative to a positive, that sort of thing. And so we started doing that, and we got it working quite well, but the problem was it wasn't fun. It was a cool idea. It was a very nice idea. It wasn't really a lot of fun to play. But then we expanded on it. We thought, we like this. We like this sort of playing with words. We expanded on it and we changed it so that you could rearrange words in descriptions of what was going on. So if there's a ship that's firing cannonballs, a big ship firing cannonballs, and there are some barrels of rum, you can switch the words around, and now you can have a ship firing rum and cannonballs doing something else. You could change words around in the environment. And again, that was clever and nice. We were pleased with ourselves, but it wasn't a lot of fun to play. So, and at this time as well, we thought, why are we still doing pirates? Pirates aren't known for being particularly good with words. I don't know why that's still our theme. So we flipped and made it a dungeon crawler. And originally, we had a game. We had 4 mages. They're zombies in the Finnish version of Cryptmaster. These are your party of characters down the bottom. But we had 4 mages, and we thought we want them to do interesting things with words. So one of them had a power that... well, first of all, I should say, sorry, we kept the same mechanic where you could take words from the environment and move them around. So if there was there was a description, like a dungeon master's description, there's a rusty gate in the room, and you could take the word rusty and you could put it on your sword. Now you've got a rusty sword. I don't know why you'd want a rusty sword, but you could do things like that. You could move words around and change what was going on. And we quite liked that. And then we had 4 mages who could do different things with words. So one of them could kind of bring words up or down. So if there's a description and it's got the word like in it, this mage could amplify it to love, or they could bring it down to dislike and hate and things like that. And they could do the same with lots of adjectives. So you could even do like cold goes to freezing, or it can come to warm and hot. And another mage had a sort of power to rearrange words completely, a sort of chaos magic where you could flip words into all sorts of different things. And that was interesting. We managed to get that working quite nicely. It still wasn't fun, if I'm honest, if I'm completely honest. It was an interesting thing, but it was a novelty. We didn't feel it was that much fun. And then eventually we began to look more at letters of words. So we had this idea, when it kind of clicked, was we had the idea of having all of your party, they're zombies, and these words down the bottom are their memories, their skills. So they start off the game remembering nothing. And it's a kind of hangman or wheel of fortune. So each one has got a skill that they're trying to remember. And lots of activities in the game allow you to get letters that then drop into these words. So, for example, there's parts of the game where the Cryptmaster, who's this mysterious necromancer who's leading you through the underworld, he will find things in chests, and there's a kind of game of 20 questions where you can tell him to sniff it, pick it up, eat it, taste it, look at it, all these different things. And you've got so many guesses. And if you guess what it is that's in the chest, so maybe it's a glove, then you'll get Glove. You'll get the letters from the item, and they'll drop down right here into your words and start filling in your words. And when you've got enough letters in the word, you'll be able to guess what it is. And so Joro, for example, that's the character over here, his first word is hit. And when you guess that, he can now hit. So then when you encounter enemies in the game, you can hit them. You can use all their skills by typing them in combat. And once we started making a game about words, we found, there's so many things you can do with words. We got carried away. So the characters' names, their health bars are their names. They can later on add extra letters to their name, so it changes their name, but it also makes them tougher. Enemies, you knock the letters off their names to kill them, and at the end you can loot a letter from their name, again to help fill in your own skill words. And we put in it, I think a lot of the things I've already talked about today. So there's palindromes in there. There's a language to decipher. There are anagrams. There are padlocks where you have to play it almost like a little Wordle type game to figure out words that are the codes to doors. I don't know why I put that slide there now. That's one of the characters from the games. An interesting thing that happened though was when we had to localize the game, because essentially we had the opportunity to have some funding to port the game to consoles, and also to put it into an additional language. And I resisted the idea of doing that to begin with, because I always knew it's not going to be a straight localization job. If you have a game where letters and words are tied so intricately into the gameplay, you can't just translate it as you would ordinarily translating dialogue or incidental text for a game. But we agreed to do it, and we did it in Spanish, and we got an amazing Spanish designer. I know some of you know Lucas Leslo, who is a fantastic Spanish designer. He came along to do the Spanish version. He was great, and it was a big job though. We found things I hadn't considered, like for example, in English, Paul had built all the systems of the game to use 26 letters. Spanish, you've got an X, you've got Enya, so suddenly, we've got a 27th letter, so I had to go to Paul and say, I'm really sorry, got to break all that, and we're putting an extra letter in the game now, which you can imagine changed all sort of things. Letter frequency is different in languages. So in Cryptmaster, we had games like, this is a card game you can play in Cryptmaster, and you have to pick letters here to fill in the names of your cards. Some letters, like A's and N's in Spanish, are really, really common. So we had to rebalance it completely. Otherwise, people would be guessing words very quickly. There was a lot of work had to go into that. As I say, Lucas was great. And I really enjoyed the process. Much as I knew it would be a big headache and a big job, I really enjoyed it because it was fun. It was fun figuring out how it could work in another language. One puzzle he did a fantastic job with. Almost, I would say, too good a job. I was slightly annoyed with him because there's a puzzle here where to get into the Toad's palace, there's a sign on the door which says news only. And when you go inside the palace, there are doors that go north, east, west, south. And so the key to getting through the palace is you have to go north, east, west, south. You spell out the word news to get through the palace. So if you've been paying attention, that's the clue to solving the puzzle. And obviously that won't work in Spanish. For one thing, Oeste in Spanish doesn't begin with a W, it begins with an O. So you've got, straight away, you can't, even if news was a Spanish word, you can't do the same puzzle. But when I showed that to Lucas, he came up with a puzzle which is even better. He came up with an even better version of it. As I say, I was slightly annoyed in Spanish because he said, well, in Spanish, what you can do, the letters will be N-O-S-E for the cardinal directions. In Spanish, you can do no sé, I don't know, as the route through the palace. And it was really clever because it means that when you ask the NPCs in the game, how do I get to the Toad? How do I get to the palace? They all say, no sé. No sé, I don't know. And that's your clue for going through the palace. So, yeah, as I say, he made a much better puzzle than mine in Spanish. And he did that a lot. He did that an aggravatingly high amount. He really did. He did a fantastic job with the Spanish localization. But it was, as I say, it was a big task. I wanted very quickly, I'm aware we're almost at the end now, just to reflect on that. I don't know how games might use, I don't want to suggest that all games should have some kind of word or language mechanic to them, but I often think there's interesting ways you could do some of these things even in more mainstream genres. I always wonder about what would an FPS be like if the enemies, for example, were speaking an alien language. And as you began to understand it, it's not taught you in the game, but as you hear it spoken, you began to think, oh, hang on, he's telling him to go left, he's telling him he's seen me. You could learn a lot of that for yourself. You could learn in an FPS or a stealth game what signs are above doors. But okay, that's security. And there are some interesting things, I think, and you could do it in quite a simple way because it doesn't have to be, as I showed earlier with Board Maker and with Captain Blood with the pictograms. You can place limits on a language to make it fairly easy to learn. It doesn't have to be incredibly complex. And I often think there are ways that you could you could put some of that into more games, even as an optional thing, as a side mechanic. Like I say, it wouldn't need to be in all games, but I think of things like in a driving game or a piloting game, a spaceship game. What if you had a co-pilot who was giving you directions in an alien language or something? Would that be fun? I don't know. It might be. You could probably do it in a fun way. I'd be interested to see that, to play that. A dream game of mine, I often think, would be one where you're just dropped into a world and you learn the language as you go. So you just dropped into a world like an RPG or something, say, and people are speaking to you. You don't understand what they're saying. But gradually you can learn to understand from context clues from the environment, like being in but like really being in a different and alien environment. And I'd love to see that done. I'd love to do that one day in a game. I've noticed recently, I don't have any examples here, I couldn't remember the names, but I've noticed there are 1 or 2 language learning games which are beginning to do this. And I think it would be a great way of teaching a language. I know I've used Duolingo sometimes, and my kids do. I tried to learn a bit of Portuguese before I came out here with Duolingo, and it's a wonderful way of learning a language. But there's, I think, opportunity, and there are some games that are beginning to explore it. Like, what would it be like if you had a game that's set in Paris, but it teaches French? The idea, it's like an RPG, but the whole idea of it is to teach you French. So you're immersed in an environment, and the mechanics of the game are actually teaching you the language. So I kind of feel there's a lot of opportunity for that. Very quickly now, because I know we're at the end. Homework, little bit of homework. I just put some things up here that I thought were really cool, that if you've been interested in some of the things in the talk, you might be interested in checking out. Some of these, Twine, I think most people will be familiar with, but there's a wonderful community around Twine who do all kinds of interesting things with words and language in games. And if you want to make your own game that plays around with words, it's a great place to start. You can make a game where words can be changed, can link to other words. It's fantastic. Similarly, the Interactive Fiction Database has got just so many games on there you can play for free that do so many clever things with words and language. I would just recommend to anybody to dive into that. Toki Pona, I love. That's a recent. It's a made-up language, a constructed language, like sort of Esperanto, but it's got very, very, very few words in it, very few characters, and it's a beautiful piece of sort of minimalism. What I was saying earlier about the way that you can put limits on language, like with Boardmaker and the pictures that carry the majority of the meaning. Toki Poker takes that kind of to an extreme, where it creates this beautiful little language out of just a handful of core concepts that you can combine together to make compound words and more complex sentences. It's just very interesting to look at. This book, because I've been reading it, I just finished it on the plane, and it's just really good. If you're into language and you're into puzzles, the sort of things I've been talking about today, I thoroughly recommend that book, The Language Lover's Puzzle Book. It's really, really good. And I couldn't resist just popping in a little plug at the end that if you like this sort of thing, you might also like to check out Cryptmaster. I've heard it's quite good. So that's it really for today. Thank you so much for coming. I hope you've got something useful from it. Thank you.
Lee, that was absolutely amazing. Completely mind-blowing. I think we're going to open up for questions if anybody's got some questions they want to raise.
So it's wonderful. Thank you very much for the talk. Yeah. I have a question. So you have it talking about the post-mortem of your game, Cryptmaster, and you talked that in the beginning was about the pirates. You found something fun, good, but not good enough or not fun. So I can imagine it has been for a long time, no? Until you find the fun. How you keep the work until you find the fun, or maybe you think you have to discard something? How is that process?
That's a good question. I think we're lucky because the core team is just the two of us, so Paul and I. So, and we're both quite kind of brutal, I guess, with our own work. We go through lots of things, lots of ideas, and we throw out lots of things. It's harder to do with a bigger team because you feel bad about asking people to ditch their work. Because I mean, we had whole prototypes, like functioning prototypes of 10, 12 different games. Paul had started doing art, I'd started doing writing, and then we just ditch it. I think you do just have to be, make yourself be a little bit brutal, I guess, or that's what worked for us anyway. We would just look at it and say, is this working? If it's not working, get rid of it. It's kind of tough, but I think we have a weird working relationship because we're kind of on opposite sides of the world. I'm in the UK, Paul's in New Zealand, so we don't. When we talk together as well, we just disagree. If we have an actual live call with each other, we get on very well, but we work better like leaving each other messages. So we have a very odd way of working. But I think that was the key to it. Probably just throwing out things that don't work and trying not to throw everything into it too early, I guess, as well, so that it's not so that you lessen the pain of having to turf out ideas that aren't working.
First of all, thank you for your presentation. It was very insightful.
Thank you. You're welcome.
I have two questions. Maybe, what do you think, what is the biggest fun about word games for players? And the second one, who's the majority of players in such games?
That's good questions. I mean, for the first one, I guess the fun is it's kind of universal, taking a pleasure in. I suppose we use language all the time, we use words all the time, and it's a skill that everybody needs. You can't really go through life easily without having skill in language. So it's something that we're almost primed to learn, and the things that we're primed to learn, I guess we're also to some extent primed to enjoy. So I think there is that natural pleasure in language and in playing with words that everybody seems to get. I mean, if you look at things like games like Wordle that are just huge and encompass, I know people, all different types of people, walks of life, who enjoy games, word games like that. As to who the target audience of players is, I guess I wish I knew because we've never been entirely sure ourselves. Like when we were making Cryptmaster, we weren't quite sure where to pitch it, how to pitch it. I think, though, there's a wide market, I think, for that sort of thing, because, as I say, we've been really surprised by people playing Cryptmaster. We've had people go into it expecting something more like a traditional dungeon crawler, which they don't get, but they end up enjoying what it is. And we've had people who are not really gamers at all, not really into games, but the word mechanic hooks them in and they appreciate it through that. So I think there's probably quite a broad appeal.
Thanks a lot.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much. That was an excellent talk. Thank you. There was a lot that I resonated with and new things to discover. So I'm going to be looking into that later. And because you were talking about, I don't even know how to start. Working with autistic kids and helping them teach communication, I've been researching a lot about that. And I noticed that a lot of the commonalities of the diagnosis is different connections in the brain can also let people make different connections between things they know and how they communicate differently, and they can also come up with things that other people wouldn't be able to. And that reminded me of the way we two work together. We have developed several games for game jams, also personal projects that started from a pun that we thought was so funny and such a fresh approach to the topic that we developed a whole game around that.
Right.
And how do you think about that as a source of inspiration?
I think that's great. I think that sounds amazing. I think if that's what works for you, that's brilliant. I don't know if I've ever done exactly that. Oh no, I have actually. Sorry, I have actually done something. I did a thing for a game jam. That was, sorry, I'm going off on a slight tangent from your question now. But there was a game jam which was around the time of the lockdowns, and so the theme of the game jam was 2 meters, because people had to stay 2 meters apart, so it was 2 meters. And I couldn't think of anything to do with 2 meters, so I made a game called Tomb Eaters, like T-O-M-B, eaters, about like creatures that ate bodies in tombs. So that I have made a game based on a pun. It started completely with a pun. But yeah, I think wherever your inspiration comes from, that's great. And language, yeah, again, language is great like that. Language is, our brains work around language. So, you're always going to find interesting connections with words and language.
Thank you. We found that was a nice way to set our games apart. We were participating in game jams with lots of people. And
Right.
so what we would usually do was we would get the theme of the game jam. We would brainstorm all the ideas that we could for, I don't know, half an hour. And then erase the board and start
Right.
all over again. Because those were the ideas everyone else was going to have.
Yeah.
And that's when we found the good stuff.
That's a good way of doing it. And one other thing I've done with games, because I used to do lots of game jams in the past. I did lots of like Ludum Dare and things. But one thing I always used to like to do is I would get the word that was the theme of the game and put it into like an online thesaurus or phrase book or something like that and pull out. So if the theme of the game was I don't know, cards, you would type that in somewhere and you would see all the phrases that have cards. Play your cards right, on the cards, things like that. And that was always one of the best things for, getting your mind to go in unusual directions with the theme, just from the word.
Thank you so much. If we can give Julie a round of
Thank you very
applause.
much. Thank you.